Hello again. In case you caught my first couple of seconds there, I forgot to turn my phone off of battery mode. And when my phone is on battery mode, it drops my service. So I am back. I'm Kate Sager. I'm going to read to you guys from The Wood Witch's Daughter, which is the first book in my Ethereal Realms young adult fantasy series. I'm a New York-based writer. I'm a dog mom. I love all things fantasy and all things fae, as you can see in my writing. So before I babble any longer, let me get started. Prologue. In the beginning, there was one realm and one rule, the Great Mother Xenia's. For eons, there was peace between Elven and mankind. Then came the Fae, with their courts and their hierarchy, their precious bloodlines. They enslaved the gentle elves and the frail mortals. The elves, wielders of the most powerful magic, foresaw the bloodshed that lay ahead and created the Veil. When the Great War came, as they knew it would, they divided the realm. On one side of the Veil, on Earth, haven of the mortals. On the other, the ethereal realms, a land of rampant magic ruled over by the tyrannical Fae courts. Two courts stood with the elves when they finally rose up against the courts. The Dreamers, who believed in the elven goal of one peaceful realm, and the Sky Fae, ever their allies. Resistance was futile. Their defeat was written in blood on the walls. The Court of Dreams fell. Their lineage and that of the elves just ended in one fell swoop. The Sky Fae avoided utter annihilation, but paid a steep price. Only the mortals, safe and on Earth, were spared the yoke of the Fae Coalition's fury. This is a tale that the courts of Shadow, Fire, Sea, and Earth would have you believe. But it is not the entire story. There is a prophecy that says that the Legion Queen will come to unite the three races of the land in harmony once again. The time draws nigh when you all must choose a side. Chapter 1. A Bittersweet Melody. The high keening sound of a woman singing. Hold on one second, guys. I've got all kinds of messages about this live in my feed. Okay. I'm going to keep going. The high keening sound of a woman singing mingled with birdsong and the low drone of insects. Something that did not belong, altering the melody of the primordial greenwood. Arianette Gracelily lifted her head, listening. She rose, following the sound, moving deftly through the underbrush, darting between the broad trunks of white birch and elm trees. Approaching the glade, she saw a striking woman in opulent black robe singing in the clearing. Her skin was darker than was common in Unearth, luminous and slightly flushed. There was an unearthly aura about her. This was no local peasant. One more second. Apparently we're having some trouble getting the live stream approved, so it shows up on the site, but I'm just going to keep reading and hope that we get that figured out eventually. Approaching the glade, she saw a striking woman in opulent black robes singing in the clearing. Her skin was darker than was common in Unearth, luminous and flushed. There was an unearthly quality about her. This was no local peasant. The part of Arianette that still clung to childlike dreams hummed to life. Was this woman, perhaps, one of the spirits she had long sought in the forgotten depths of the greenwood? Some residual reminder of the Fae? But no, that was a child's fancy, and she was a woman grown now. This was just a traveler, visiting the greenwood, to witness the rite. Arianette stepped out from behind the trees and into the copse. Lady, it is not safe to venture this far into the woods alone. It is said that spirits haunt them. One more second, guys. It is said that spirits haunt them, and there are wolves to worry about. May I be of aid to you? Arianette asked the stranger. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Sorry, we're still trying to figure out what's going on here. The woman jerked her head up and met Arianette's questioning gaze with wide-set almond eyes dark as pre-dawn sky. "Ah, Woodwitch, I hope we might stumble upon one another." The woman's voice was melodic as a nightingale's, carrying the rolling accent of a foreign tongue. Arianette took a few hesitant steps closer. No matter how long she gazed at the woman, she couldn't seem to get a clear glimpse of her features. But then, the dappled light of these woods had always played tricks on the eyes. "My mother, Amabella, was the Woodwitch of this land, but she is gone, and I fear I am a poor replacement. Do you have some injury that needs tending?" "In Siur Anam Sir," the dark woman said, with an unreadable expression. "I'm sorry, I don't understand," Arianette began, though the language sounded familiar. The woman cut her off with a fluttering motion of her hands. "It makes no matter, child. The night will bring answers," she said with an odd little smile. "I shall see you at the night fires." The woman turned away from Arianette and walked deeper into the greenwood. "Wait," Arianette called after her. "Who are you?" "My name is Lorna Blackburn," she said. Arianette was sure she caught a mischievous glint in the woman's eyes before she turned and strode off. Her form was lost amid the elongating shadows and towering trees, not even a footfall left in her wake. One second. All right, hopefully we can get this figured out. I'll just keep reading. One more second. Okay. The woman in the woods tugged at Arianette's mind even as she made her way back to her cabin. She took the long way home, following the deer trail that skirted around the town proper rather than the major thoroughfare. The town would be bustling with folk preparing for the rite, and she would rather avoid the masses. She had never had her mother's effortless way with the villagers. They mistrusted her magic, modest though it was, and Arianette sensed it whenever they chanced to meet. She reached the split where the path and the road merged into one. A few villagers were already making their way towards the western fringes of the forest, preparing for the evening's festivities. Arianette smiled half-heartedly at the folks as she passed. They met her smile with indifferent nods. "Hi, Shauna. Hi, guys. I guess the stream is working now. That's very exciting." So I will keep going, and for what you missed, you can go back to the beginning and check it out when it's posted. So they met her smiles with indifferent nods, all but one. A bent and bowed old woman with skin like crumpled paper froze in her tracks as Arianette passed by. She stared at her, disgust contorting her features. "You smell of the other side. You smell fey-touched, girl. Beware the veil tonight," the woman hissed at her. Arianette blinked, a chill running down her spine. The woman passed by, hissing as she hobbled down the road, making the sign of the goddess Xenia surreptitiously in the air as she went. Only when her form was small and distant did Arianette recover enough to continue on her way. A wave of relief washed over her when the familiar sight of her cottage came into view, but she could not shake the dread that had settled over her. The old woman had said she smelled fey-touched, and this was the night of the rite, when the veil between the realms was at its thinnest. Could it be that this strange woman in the greenwood had been from beyond the veil? Arianette replayed the events of the afternoon in her mind. The woman's name kept repeating. Lorna Blackburn, Blackburn, Blackburn. It repeated like a chorus in her head until at last it dawned upon her. Arianette leapt to her feet and ran over to her pallet, digging around beneath it until she found what she sought, an illuminated book. Swirling ink on the cover proclaimed it to be Tales of the Fae. Such books were rarer than rare, and Arianette still did not know how her mother had procured it, but since the day Amabella had given it to her on her 12th name day, it had been a prized possession. Arianette had always been preoccupied with the Fae and the world beyond the veil. While others found it terrifying, she had always found it enchanting. She flipped through the pages, pausing at the chapter headings for each court. Earth then sky, fire then sea. Next came Arianette's favorite, the Court of Dreams. Today, though, she skimmed straight past it. She was seeking shadow, not light. What was in a name? Certain names had power, and the one Lorna had uttered struck a chord in her mind as familiar. Because, she realized, she had read it hundreds of times. Arianette traced her fingers along the illustration. Court of Shadows, ruler, House Blackburn, the inscription beneath the image read. She sat, fingering the book, lost in thought. Outside, darkness was gathering in the greenwood. She watched the orange light flickering as the night fires were lit. Smoke wafted through her window. She should remain here, she knew, safe within her cottage. The veil was thin, and it seemed to Faye from the Shadow Court might very well lurk in the forest. But it was as if something in the woods beckoned her, called her forth, demanded that she come and see what secrets the night held. Giving in to curiosity, Arianette rose and flung her cloak over her shoulders. She paused for a moment at the threshold as Amabella's words rang in her mind, as if her mother's ghost shared the room with her. The night fires are not for us. We are wood witches. We have a special connection to the natural powers, and that makes this night a danger to us. We serve as a beacon when we venture too close to the fires. Those on the other side of the veil might see the spark of our magic and seek to claim it for themselves. We dare not risk drawing attention to ourselves. But her mother was dead and gone, and whatever lay in wait in the forest, the call was too strong for Arianette to resist. She stepped outside, following the narrow trail from her cottage towards the forest. Smoke rose, darker and more acrid now, as the fires raged higher and burned hotter. Despite the warmth of midsummer, a shiver crept down Arianette's spine. She folded her arms across her chest as she walked, pulling her cloak around herself. Tonight, everything about the forest felt strange to her. The eerie energy only grew more intense as she moved deeper into the woods. She was not sure where she was going. It was like a powerful sixth sense was driving her. The deeper she went, the quieter it grew, as she left behind the rising crescendo of the villagers' fervent prayers to Xenia. The quiet seemed only to magnify the intense pulse of energy in the atmosphere. Everything felt taut, even Arianette's nerves. She smelled cedar and herbs burning, verbena, willowweep, sadie's tears, and something else. These were not the traditional herbs burned during the rite. The air was laced with an overwhelmingly ephemeral aroma. Thanks, Daisy. Magic, Arianette realized, and froze, heart pounding. She pressed her body against the trunk of a tree with bark so rough and gnarled that it bit through the thin cotton of her rough-spun frock. Of course there was magic here, she reassured herself. It was the night of the rite. Wasn't the purpose to celebrate and reinforce the magic that sealed the veil? But this was not the magic of the Xenian priestesses. This magic was raw, visceral, not the earth magic Arianette was accustomed to. She continued creeping forward until she reached a small clearing. The dark-cloaked form of Lorna Blackburn stood at its center. She was motionless, but for her lips. Strings of words in a strange tongue poured from her mouth. Arianette moved towards Lorna's black silhouette, outlined against the red and gold backdrop of fire. As she drew up beside her, Lorna shifted towards Arianette, her black robes falling away, revealing a slender arm ringed in elaborate swirling tattoos. They appeared to be glyphs, but Arianette had no time to study them. Hi, Susanna. Lorna seized her by the hand. Her long nails bit into Arianette's calloused palm. She winced, but did not pull away as Lorna's chanting grew louder. The language seemed to grow more familiar as the chant went on. Like something she had heard before, but not exactly. It was more like the words and melody were ingrained in the very fiber of her being. Then Arianette felt her own voice welling up inside her throat, forcing its way out. Strange words tumbled from her lips, but the chant did not sound like two voices blended in harmony. It sounded legion, like 100 voices were weaving an elaborate melody. A fey melody. The veil between worlds slips on the night of the rite, her mother's voice whispered again in the back of her mind. Do not draw attention to yourself. Too late. The smoke grew ghastly thick, and Arianette's eyes watered, her vision blurring. Her tongue was numb, but still she continued reciting the words. The world seemed to recede and slip away. There was only the fire and the words. Lorna released Arianette's hand and grew silent, and all was quiet but for the roar of the flames. Arianette turned to her, eyes wide. A dozen questions died on her lips when she saw Lorna's grim expression and gritted teeth, wavering, in and out of focus. It was not a human face at all. Before Arianette stood the glimmering visage of a shadow fae, struggling to hold on to her human glamour. You know the words, Wood Witch. Stolen child of the fae. Legion Queen, promised to us in prophecy. Lorna spoke again in her accented common tongue. Arianette backed away, panic rising inside that threatened to choke her. Lorna's face was an impassive mask, but her movements were lightning quick. She did not step so much as shift, melding with the shadows and reappearing at Arionette's side once more. "I am very sorry for this, Arionette Gracelily," she whispered. But it's time to return to the ethereal realms." Then she shoved Arionette hard with her inhuman fairy strength, sending her hurtling headlong into the blue-tinged night fire. I think we can get one more chapter in. Let's see. Chapter 2, The Queen of Nothing. Though her name was written all over the annals of history, Morgane was no one. She was a whisper of a memory, spilled ink on the pages of time. Still, her words had the power to shift the worlds, mortal and fey, and her creatures slithered through the swamps, took to wing in the sky, and skulked through the forests. It was her words and her wings that had led the shadow sorceress to the girl. It was a shame Amabella had sacrificed in vain trying to hide the girl. Morgane could have used the wood witch. But no matter. What was done, and Morgane dared not meddle with blood magic to bring Amabella back. She could have done it. She had the power to restore life. But such spells were messy and had notoriously mixed results. "Asaperi," Morgane whispered. The winged form of a falcon stirred the air, landing beside Morgane. A shadow detached itself from the bird, and in its place stood a long-limbed elven man with feathery hair the hue of dried leaves and large owl-wide eyes. "She crossed the veil, my lady, and is in the Sky Court. Though I will say, your words caused some confusion." A little smile toyed at the corner of Asaperi's lips. Morgane sighed and gazed heavenward. "Oh, they always do, especially with the Fae. They're so literal, and they're terrible translators." Morgane flicked her wrist, a cluster of vines sprouting from the ceiling above her, draping down over her throne. She toyed with them as they coiled around her arm. "Yes, well, the shadow conjurer lured her to the night fires and shoved her in. Apparently she misunderstood that part about burning." Asaperi could barely contain his grin. Morgane's eyebrows shot up, and her laughter twinkled out like bells. "They never make things easy for themselves, do they?" Asaperi crowed. "That they do not," Morgane agreed. "You have done well in this, Asaperi. There will be a place of honor for you by my side when we burn the courts and form our unified realm." Morgane's burdened eyes glittered. The fresh vines ensconcing the throne unfurled, twining themselves upwards around Morgane's torso. She touched one, and a tiny bud sprang open into a large white lily. Morgane sniffed it, smiling serenely. "And when will that be, my queen of the realms?" Asaperi asked eagerly. "Hush, don't call me that, not even here. One never knows where eyes and ears might be. I am the queen of nothing," Morgane hissed. She liked the ring of that. It would not do for the Fae to learn that their prophesied one was being pushed forward by an elven queen seeking to restore the old ways. No, that would not do. Morgane was content to be the queen of nothing. For now. The dreamer still sleeps. The Legion Queen's powers are bound, and she has no memories of her life on this side of the veil. I was with Amabella when the girl was born. I have seen the chart of her stars. She is fated for star-crossed love. We must watch and wait. An opportunity to claim her will present itself. Asaperi was, unsurprisingly, unhappy with this response. After centuries of life, he was still rash, impatient, impulsive. It surprised Morgane that he had not kidnapped the girl from the Sky Fae as soon as they crossed over. That was his nature. She could not change his nature, but she could keep him on a short leash. "Keep your eyes on the girl, the Silver Lord, and the Golden Warrior, and the Dark Sorceress, but do so discreetly. Do not jeopardize my plans," Morgane told Asaperi. He refrained from smirking, though she could tell it was difficult for him. Instead, he made a stiff bow. "As you wish, my queen," he said. Then he whistled the high keening cry of a raptor and slipped once more into the form of his familiar, taking wing in the Sky Court. I have no idea what time it is. I don't have a clock in here, so I'm going to start one more chapter and hopefully not go over. Chapter 3, Beyond the Veil. Arionette lay on her back. Overhead, stars winked and twin moons grinned down at her, crescent slender as curved blades in the indigo sky. She bolted upright and looked around. She was in an open-air courtyard. White stone spires soared overhead, gleaming like moonstone against a smoky backdrop of snow-capped mountains. She considered the possibility that she was dead. She had, after all, been shoved into a fire. Perhaps this was the afterlife. But her skull pounded and her skin knees burned. She could only hope, thank you, Shauna, she could only hope to be relieved of such worldly pain should she pass into the void. Child, are you all right? The voice sounded concerned and familiar. Arionette swiveled her head to see Lorna Blackburn lowering herself into a graceful kneeling position beside her. The fairy, having shed her glamour, stopped Arionette's breath. Lorna, in her true form, was just a slip of a thing, with ebony skin and indigo eyes. She looked almost identical to the Shadow Fae illustration in Arionette's book, Tales of the Fae, with her bat-like wings folded like black leather at her shoulder blades. "Where am I?" Arionette asked, scuttling backwards away from Lorna. She winced as the flagstones bit into the abrasions on her palms. "Beyond the veil," Lorna said, her voice calm. "In the ethereal realms." Arionette blinked at her. "The Court of Shadows?" she asked, voice trembling. Lorna laughed, the sound high and sweet as her voice had been when it was lifted in song in the clearing. "Of course not. Does this look like the Court of Shadows to you?" She asked, gesturing towards the palace sprawling before them. Arionette had to admit that it did not. There was nothing shadowy about the grand ivory arches and embellished pillars or the lifelike statues standing sentinel around the courtyard. "We're in the Sky Court. You may recall—" "You don't look like a Sky Fae," Arionette countered, interrupting her. Lorna frowned, a crease forming between her brows. "No, I suppose I don't, but that's a tale for another day." Her tone did not leave room for argument. She moved out of her crouch and reached for Arionette's hand, pulling her to her feet in a single fluid movement. "I'm not going anywhere with you. What were you doing in the forest? Tell me why you've brought me here," Arionette declared, beginning to feel panicky. "We'll have plenty of time to discuss that after you've met with the Sky Lord," Lorna said, sounding piqued. What on earth could the Sky Lord want with her, the mortal daughter of a wood witch, Arionette wondered. And she would have asked just that, but before she got another word out, a shadow fell over them from above. The sound of beating wings became audible, and Arionette glanced up to see the most majestic creature she had ever seen in her life. Like a magnificent bird of prey, the fairy swooped down from the sky, looking more like a statue than a man. He could have been carved from bronze, powerfully built, with gracefully sweeping antlers of a stag arcing from the crown of his head. He surveyed Arionette with open curiosity, his eyes a warm amber hue with irises ringed in gold. Most striking of all were his massive tawny wings, shot through with gleaming crimson and ivory feathers. "And who is this?" the antlered Fae asked in a voice that commanded attention. "I should think that would be rather obvious, Brayden," Lorna said. "Right, of course. This must be the prophesied Legion Queen you crossed the veil to collect. It's just that she seems awfully mortal," Brayden observed, puzzled. "I'm not a queen," Arionette interjected, but Lorna rolled her eyes. "Oh, be quiet, child. Listen, Brayden, no mortal could survive crossing the veil through fire, although I will admit to being a bit underwhelmed by her myself," Lorna said, frowning. "Perhaps you grabbed the wrong girl?" "Don't be a fool. She's the right girl. Look closer. There's something about her, don't you think? An aura of—" Lorna dropped off, but continued to gaze at Arionette the way a small child might peer at an unusual insect right before ripping its wings off. Arionette took a few steps back away from her. She briefly considered trying to bolt and make a run for it, but dismissed the idea. She was in a castle in the clouds. Trying to scale the walls surrounding the courtyard could only end in a fall to her death. "So what are your plans for her?" Brayden asked. Now he too was studying Arionette, and she wilted beneath his gaze. "Well, I didn't bring her back because I wanted a new pet." Lorna rubbed a finger along her lower lip. "I suspect she has untapped powers, bound somehow, perhaps." "I don't have any powers," Arionette insisted. "I'm just the Wood Witch's daughter. I know the properties of plants, how to heal people with them. I'm not even any good at that. I don't cast spells, and I definitely don't have powers." "Herb magic, spell magic, it's all the same thing. If you can do one, you can do the other." Lorna waved a hand, dismissive. Runes glittered at her wrist. Arionette wrung her hands, looking as if she would weep. "Lorna, that's enough," Brayden admonished, picking up on Arionette's distress. He turned to address her. "Listen, I know you're frightened, but I promise we mean you no harm. Lorna's methods can sometimes be a bit questionable, I know, but she means well. Would you let us bring you into the Sky Tower? Braden gestured towards an arch to their left. It was flanked on either side by winged forms carved from marble. They looked like avenging angels standing guard. Aryanet glanced at Braden, dubious, then sighed in capitulation. Fine, she conceded, and allowed him to lead her into the palace. So I think my time is almost up. I want to thank you guys for joining me, reading the first 2 chapters in prologue. I posted my reader group in the description of the live. If you guys want to hang out there, you can see my stuff. And I also do a free promotion Tuesday, every Tuesday. So any other writers who want to promote their work, I don't have a huge group, but I do have a pretty active group. And I'm sure that people would love to check out what you're writing. It's mostly fantasy, sci-fi, that kind of stuff. But whatever you do, feel free to pop in. And thank you so much for having me, Wanda, and the staff at Writers Rock. I hope people enjoyed my story, and if you fell in love with it, you can find it on Amazon. And I can't wait to see all the other writers who are going to be reading from their works today. And have a great Sunday, everybody. Thanks, Shauna.